Hey everyone, thank you for taking time out of your week to spend a little time with me. You are greatly appreciated. Our case was suggested by fellow viewer Bob, so thank you in advance. This week we're discussing the murder of the Elliott family, who on the surface seemed ordinary, a wife, a husband, and their 2 children. But when the bodies were discovered, it left more questions than answers. The case went unsolved for years, where little pieces of the Elliott's private life began to unfold. So we're going to discuss the details and the aftermath of what occurred with this quadruple homicide. So as always, I invite you to join me as we remember the Elliott family. Not much information was available regarding the Elliott family and their early beginnings. But what is known is Carl Elliott married Lisa Elliott some years prior to that fateful night. Shortly after their marriage, they had their first child, a daughter named Felicia, followed by their son Gregory the following year. Carl worked as a mechanic and a carpenter. The Elliots lived in a house on a decent-sized property, so they had Lisa's father and stepmother living behind their house in a mobile home as to keep them closer due to their old age. Her father and stepmother reportedly had some mental illness, possibly dementia, and were losing their hearing. The family lived in the town of Dalton, Arkansas. It was rather small and very rural. And essentially, everyone knew everyone. Another interesting thing about Dalton was that law enforcement didn't really bother the residents, so it made the area a hot spot for the drug trade. On the night of July 30th, 1998, a massive storm passed over the area. While on patrol that night, the county deputy named Randy Barber got a call regarding a domestic disturbance over on Township Road. It was about 1:15 in the morning when he arrived at the property belonging to the Elliott family. According to the report, there was a lot of hollering happening at the home, but when the deputy arrived, everything was calm. Nothing suspicious, no lights, nothing. The rain was really coming down, so without performing a welfare check, he left the scene and thought nothing of it. Later that morning, after the sun rose, Lisa's stepmother, Mrs. DuBois, woke up and tried to go out her front door, but couldn't due to something heavy blocking it. She couldn't force it open, so she gave up and went around the other way. But when she reached the porch, laying in front of the door was the lifeless body of her 27-year-old stepdaughter, Lisa Elliott. Mrs. DuBois panicked, returned back inside to alert her husband Kenny of the discovery. Sheriff Rob Sammons arrived to the home. He attempted to knock on the front door but realized it was slightly cracked open. So instead he opted to call out to the family, but he got no response. There was no sounds other than the television playing in the distance. Sheriff Sammons drew his weapon before entering the home. He only made it a few steps inside before discovering the body of 6-year-old Gregory Elliott on the living room floor. Concerned, he quickly moved to search the rest of the home for any possible survivors. Blood was found in the kitchen, the dining room, and even on a child's toy telephone that sat on a desk. It was apparent someone fought for their life. Outside, Lisa was found in the same position her stepmother had found her. Investigators observed a bloody handprint on her father's front door. Sheriff Sammons found no other bodies in the home. 30-year-old Carl Elliott and his 7-year-old daughter Felicia were nowhere to be found. For a brief period, Carl was the prime suspect in the murders. But after an extensive search and 48 hours later, Carl's body was discovered in nearby 11 Point River. He sustained 2 gunshot wounds from a .22 caliber gun in the back of his head and had superficial wounds to his throat. The Associate State Medical Examiner performed the autopsies on both Lisa and Gregory Elliott. Lisa was found to have suffered from 27 blows to the head with a blunt object. The wounds were consistent with a tire iron found in the house. However, this isn't what caused her death. The killer took one side of the tire iron and plunged it into her throat, piercing her carotid artery and severing her windpipe. The autopsy records show Gregory suffered a similar fate. The tire iron was plunged into his throat multiple times. During this assault, his skull was cracked by one of the impacts. He also had several knife wounds and a broken jaw. After the discovery of Carl's body, the question remained: where was Felicia Elliott? Investigators searched for 2 years with no answers. Then on September 7th, 2000, the horrible truth surfaced. A hunter out near Warm Springs stumbled on human remains in a dry creek bed. DNA determined they were the remains of Felicia Elliott. Due to the time passed in state of decomposition, Felicia's cause of death was unable to be determined. During the course of the investigation, there were a number of suspects, but none more suspicious than members of the Green family. The Greens were a violent family who lived in nearby Randolph County. The patriarch, Billy Green, was a known drug trafficker. His oldest son, Chad Green, worked alongside him in the family business. Carl Elliott had been involved in some minor drug exchanges with the Greens. In fact, he and Chad were pretty good friends. But seemingly out of nowhere, the relationship fell apart and rumors started to swirl. One of the rumors was Chad stole several pot plants from Billy and the Greens weren't happy. Another stated 2 months before the murders, Lisa Elliott allegedly reached out to an acquaintance asking for a $10,000 loan because they owed money to the Greens and she was very frightened of them. The Greens were professional criminals, so it's not a surprise why the cops had their sights set on them. They were questioned on multiple occasions throughout the years, but they never had enough evidence or definitive proof to charge them with the murders. But, as luck would have it, police received the break they needed on July 29, 2003. A confidential informant later identified as Mary Green, Billy's former wife, told them exactly as her son had told her, and some things Billy said as well. She stated on the evening of July 29, 1998, Billy got a call from Chad and left their house without saying anything and was gone for several hours. She didn't understand what happened until 2 years later when Billy told her he had gone to meet Chad to help him clean up the murders. Mary claimed that Billy told her Chad was responsible for all 4 deaths, while on the other hand, Chad claimed on more than one occasion Billy was the culprit. The following day, police arrested 27-year-old Chad Green and his father, 47-year-old Billy Green, on unrelated charges. During questioning, they brought up this newfound information and began to apply the pressure. Billy wasn't bothered. He didn't sway. But Chad eventually started to talk. Investigators explained to Chad that if he would testify against his father, they would offer him a plea bargain. He would be given 40 years for his part in the quadruple homicide. And Chad accepted the deal and started to explain what happened that night. Chad confirmed that Carl engaged in illegal dealings with him and his father, and he did steal from Billy. This made Billy enraged, so he sought revenge and they hatched a plan together. On the night in question, the Elliots were getting ready to turn in for the night when a knock came on the door. It was Carl's friend Chad. Chad explained that his truck had broken down about a mile from their home and he needed some assistance. Carl agreed to help, so he and Chad got in his car and left the house. According to Chad, when they arrived at his truck, Billy was there waiting for them. Billy then shot Carl twice before pushing him into the river. Chad explained he and Billy then took Carl's car and drove back to the Elliott residence. Chad stated Billy explained that they knew Carl was with Chad and they needed to clean up the loose ends. Gregory Elliott saw his father's car pull up and quickly raced to the door. Who he met is unclear, but according to Chad, it was Billy Elliott. Chad waited outside by the car when he suddenly heard a lot of yelling and commotion. He decided to go in and check on his father, but instead he found his father beating Lisa. Billy told his son to go back outside since the matter didn't concern him. When he turned to leave, he saw Gregory on the floor. Reportedly, once Billy was done, he sought out Felicia, who was hiding in her bedroom. He wrapped her in blankets and carried her outside with him. Chad could see the little girl moving before his father placed her in the trunk, taping her hands and mouth. They then got in the car and started to pull away when Billy noticed something crawling across the yard. It was Lisa Elliott. So Billy got out of the car again and ended her life before returning and leaving the property. Chad claimed Felicia Elliott was kept alive for another 2 days. She was held in a trash can in the garage where temperatures soared upwards to 100 degrees. She was assaulted repeatedly before allegedly Billy stated, quote, "All good things must come to an end," end quote. Felicia was then taken to a creek about a half-mile from the Green home. According to Chad, Billy forced her head under the water before cutting her throat on the night of August 1st, 1998. Both Billy and Chad Green were convicted in 2004. Billy Green received the death penalty for his involvement, while Chad only got 40 years through his plea bargain. However, the case wasn't closed and shut. In 2006, the Arkansas Supreme Court overturned Billy's conviction. They stated that improper testimony had been allowed during the first trial. A woman who was a witness for the prosecution testified that she thought Billy had killed her nephew and she was scared of him. This should have resulted in a mistrial, since she testified on a completely unrelated event. So on an appeal, the original conviction was thrown out and a new trial was ordered for Billy. But unlike the first trial, Chad refused to re-testify against his father a second time. His refusal to cooperate voided his original deal, and he too needed to be resentenced. Billy Green's second trial took place during May of 2012. One of the witnesses for the prosecution was an inmate from the Federal Correctional Institute in Fort Worth who had been cellmates with Billy in the Arkansas Department of Corrections in 2008. On May 3rd, the inmate testified that Billy told him his son hurt Felicia on several occasions prior to the murders. Felicia allegedly told her father, and he was planning to take the information to the sheriff. According to the inmate, Billy stated Chad went to the Elliot home because of this, and decided to lure Carl to the 11-Point River where he shot him. Chad then went back to the house and killed the remaining members of the Elliot family. The inmate also stated, quote, "Chad stabbed the mom with a knife, then took the girl," end quote. The inmate also claimed that Billy told him what Felicia's last words were. She stated, quote, "Please don't hurt me," end quote. During his retrial, Billy turned the tables and testified against Chad. He stated Chad told him shortly after the killings that he had murdered the Elliot family. Billy and Chad were driving back to their house in Warm Springs from a convenience store days after news of the slaying. Billy asked Chad if he had killed them, and Chad replied yes as tears flowed down his cheeks. Chad explained to Billy that he drove to the 11-Point River on the night of the killings and his truck died. He walked to Carl's house for help, and the two returned to his vehicle when an argument broke out. Billy testified that, quote, "Chad threw his gun in Carl's face and it went off," end quote. Chad then rolled his body into the river and went to the house to kill the rest of the family because they knew he was with Carl. He killed Lisa and Greg, then carried Felicia out in a rug and put her in the trunk. He later killed Felicia. Billy claimed his son carried the little girl through a wooded area and waded into a creek that flooded during the storm and murdered her too. Billy claimed he didn't originally explain his son's confession back in 1998 because he believed his son would be convicted and executed for his crimes. However, investigators stated that what evidence they did have suggested two people were involved in the attacks. Without reliable witnesses or solid DNA evidence, the crime couldn't be pinned on just one of the Greens. Chad Green was sentenced to 4 life sentences in prison and an additional 40 years for the kidnapping. In an unrelated case, he received another 56 years for assaulting 2 other young girls. Billy Green received 4 life sentences for the murders and an additional 40 years for the kidnapping as well. The death penalty was taken off the table due to the case being circumstantial. A big witness to the prosecution was Mary Green, and they felt that if the death penalty were up for grabs, she may not be willing to testify against them. Both Billy and Chad Green are serving their life sentences at the Arkansas Department of Corrections. The Elliott family was laid to rest together at the Gravesville Cemetery in Dalton, Arkansas. I know there was a lot of back and forth and finger pointing in this one, so it's not super clear who was actually responsible for the death of this family. I think the judge and jury played it smart by just administering the exact same sentences for both parties, because one thing that's for sure is both of them played some kind of part in their deaths. But as always, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about this, so leave your comments down below and we can chat about it. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving it a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you should, because we would love to have you under the ash tree. Thank you so much, friends, for tuning in and making it this far. You are awesome, and I appreciate you all. Thank you for giving me this platform and just supporting me unconditionally. You really make my week, and I hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, friends.